The man the vampires dragged forward tries to steady himself, but the lead vampire steps into his path before he can regain even a shred of control. "You will not look at him," the vampire says. "You will look at her." He turns toward her, slow and reluctant, like the movement itself costs him something. The covens watch without blinking, not because they care, but because the vampires have forced the moment into existence. A second vampire circles behind him, voice cutting through the room. "You stood above her." A third joins, tone colder. "And now you don't." The man swallows hard. He knows what's coming. He just doesn't know how fast. The lead vampire gestures at her, sharp and final. "She will speak. You will accept." She doesn't hesitate. "You're done," she says. "They've removed you." The words hit him like a blow he can't dodge. His shoulders drop. His breath stutters. But he doesn't argue, not with the vampires standing inches away. A vampire leans close to him, voice low enough to feel like a threat. "Bo." He bows to her, not out of respect, not out of choice, because the hierarchy leaves him no other option. The vampires watch the bow with the satisfaction of a structure snapping exactly where they wanted it to. And the moment he lowers his head to her, the hierarchy shifts under everyone's feet. The moment the man bows to her, the vampires move. "Remove him," the lead vampire says. The mid-tier doesn't hesitate. They pull him out of the circle with a speed that makes it clear this isn't punishment, it's extraction. He's gone before he can lift his head again. The vampires close the empty space he leaves behind, forming a tighter ring around her. The covens shift back instinctively, giving the vampires room they didn't ask for. One vampire steps forward. "You created a vacancy." Another follows, voice colder. "And we will not leave it open." The lead vampire gestures at the space where the man stood. "Step into it." She moves without hesitation, not because she wants to, because the hierarchy demands it. The moment she takes the position, the covens react. Not with words, with movement, a subtle, involuntary adjustment as they realign themselves around her new standing. A vampire watches the shift with a sharp, satisfied stillness. "This is where you stand now." Another adds, "And they will adjust to you." The covens lower their heads, accepting the new order because refusing it isn't an option. The vampires don't give them time to settle. One turns toward the mid-tier. She rose. Another steps in beside them. "You did not." The tension in the room tightens like a pulled wire. The lead vampire looks at her again, not with approval, not with praise, but with ownership. "You will act again when we call." The covens brace. She holds her new place. And the hierarchy shifts around her like a living thing. The covens barely finish adjusting around her new position before the vampires strike again. "Not enough," one of them says. The room tightens. Another vampire steps forward, eyes locked on the mid-tier. Someone else stood above her. The covens freeze. No one moves. No one volunteers. No one breathes wrong. The lead vampire lifts a hand and points, not at random, not with hesitation, but with the precision of someone who already decided long before this moment. "You." A witch stiffens. She doesn't try to hide the fear. She can't. The vampires gesture sharply. "Bring her forward." The mid-tier obeys instantly, pushing the witch into the circle. She stumbles, catches herself, and forces her eyes down. A vampire steps behind her. "You held rank over her." Another moves to her side. "You will answer for it." The lead vampire turns to the girl. "Deliver it." There's no pause, no question, no mercy. "You're being lowered," she says. "By their order." The witch's breath breaks. Her hands tremble, but she doesn't resist, not with the vampires surrounding her. A vampire leans close, voice like a blade. "Bo." The witch drops to her knees in front of the girl, head down, shoulders shaking under the weight of the command. The hierarchy shifts again, sharper, deeper, more violent than before. And the vampires watch it happen with the satisfaction of a structure being rebuilt exactly the way they want it. The witch is still on her knees when the vampires move again. "Lift her," one commands. The mid-tier obeys instantly, pulling the witch to her feet. She's unsteady, but she doesn't dare look anywhere except the floor. A vampire steps behind her. "You held rank over her." Another moves to the girl's side. "And now you don't." The lead vampire gestures sharply. "Strip her placement." The covens react before the witch can. They reach for the insignia that marks her standing, not violently, but with the precision of people who know hesitation is dangerous. The symbol is removed in seconds. The vampires don't look at the witch again. They look at the girl. "You will take what she lost." The words hit the room like a fracture. The covens shift. The hierarchy tilts. And the girl steps forward because the structure leaves her no other direction. A vampire moves in front of her, close enough that the covens tense. "This is not a title," they say. "This is a position." Another adds, "And positions carry weight." The witch who once stood above her lowers her head even further, shoulders trembling under the new order. The lead vampire turns to the covens. She rises. A second vampire finishes the sentence. "You fall." The covens bow, not in respect, but in fear of what the vampires will take next. And the girl stands in the center of the shift, held in place by the authority that just tore another piece out of the hierarchy to make room for her. The covens haven't finished adjusting to her new placement when the vampires strike again. Not enough, one of them says. The room locks up. Another vampire steps forward, eyes sweeping the mid-tier like they're counting floors. Two stood above her. A ripple of dread moves through the covens. The lead vampire lifts a hand and points, sharp, deliberate, impossible to mistake. You, a werewolf stiffens. He doesn't try to hide the fear. He can't. Bring him, the vampire commands. The covens shove him into the circle. He stumbles, catches himself, and keeps his head down. The vampires don't give him time to breathe. You held rank over her, one says. You will answer for it, another adds. The lead vampire turns to the girl. Deliver it. She doesn't pause. You're being lowered, she says. By their order. The werewolf's jaw tightens. His hands curl, but he doesn't resist, not with the vampires closing in around him. A vampire steps behind him, voice low and merciless. Kneel. He drops to one knee in front of her, head bowed, breath shaking under the weight of the command. The hierarchy snaps again, harder, deeper, more violent than the last shift. The vampires watch the kneel with cold satisfaction. One speaks, she rises, another finishes. You fall. The covens bow their heads, the structure rearranging itself around her whether they want it to or not. And she stands in the center of it, not untouched, not passive, but the axis the vampires are rebuilding the hierarchy around. The werewolf is still kneeling when the vampires shift again, not away from him, but toward the rest of the covens. Three stood above her, one vampire says. The room jolts. No one moves. No one breathes. Another vampire steps forward, voice cutting through the covens like a command they've been dreading. Identify the third. The covens freeze. No one volunteers. No one risks pointing. No one risks being wrong. The lead vampire doesn't wait. They lift a hand and point, sharp, precise, final. You, a witch at the back of the covens goes rigid. Her eyes widen. Her hands curl. She doesn't try to hide the fear. Bring her, the vampire orders. The covens shove her forward. She stumbles into the circle, landing between the girl and the kneeling werewolf. She tries to steady herself, but a vampire steps behind her before she can. You held rank over her, the vampire says. Another moves to the girl's side. And now you answer for it. The lead vampire turns to the girl. Deliver it. She doesn't hesitate. You're being lowered, she says. By their order. The witch's breath breaks. Her shoulders shake. But she doesn't resist, not with the vampires closing in. A vampire leans close, voice low and merciless. Kneel. The witch drops to her knees beside the werewolf, head bowed, hands trembling. Two former superiors kneeling before her. Two positions stripped. Two fractures in the hierarchy. The vampires watch the double kneel with cold satisfaction. One speaks. She rises. Another finishes. You fall. The covens bow their heads, the structure collapsing and reforming around her faster than they can keep up. And she stands in the center of it. The point the vampires are using to break the hierarchy open. The two kneeling figures haven't moved when the fracture starts. It doesn't begin with words. It begins with fear. A witch in the back of the covens shifts half a step away from the others, small, instinctive, the kind of movement that would normally go unnoticed. But the covens are stretched too thin, too shaken, too exposed. Another witch pulls back with her. A werewolf follows, then another. The line breaks, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the hierarchy to feel it. The covens try to correct themselves, but the damage is already done. The space between them widens, a silent admission that they no longer trust standing shoulder to shoulder. Someone else steps back. Someone else hesitates. Someone else looks at her, not with anger, not with defiance, but with the realization that the vampires are using her rise to measure their weakness. The fracture spreads. A witch pulls her hand away from the person beside her. A werewolf shifts his stance, distancing himself from the group he once led. Two coven members who always stood together now stand apart. The hierarchy trembles, not because she moved, because they didn't, and now they're afraid of being the next ones dragged forward. The kneeling witch finally feels the shift behind her and flinches, as if the fracture itself might swallow her. The werewolf beside her lowers his head even further, trying to disappear into the floor. The covens keep pulling apart, inch by inch, until the circle looks wrong, uneven, unstable, broken in a way the vampires will not tolerate when they return. And she stands in the center of it, the only one whose position isn't slipping. The fracture grows, the covens brace, and the hierarchy waits for the vampires to come back and decide what breaks next. The fracture doesn't stop at distance. It turns into blame. A witch snaps first, a sharp, panicked whisper aimed at the werewolf beside her. You should have stepped forward. He bares his teeth, not in threat but in fear. I wasn't the one above her. Another witch cuts in, voice shaking. You were closer than I was. A werewolf shoves her shoulder. You moved back first. The covens ripple with tension. Not coordinated, not controlled, Just raw panic breaking through the structure the vampires forced them into. Someone grabs someone else's arm. Someone pulls away too hard. Someone stumbles into the wrong person. The circle collapses inward, then outward, then inward again. A chaotic, silent fight for distance, for safety, for anything that keeps them from being the next one dragged forward. The two kneeling figures flinch as the covens shift around them, terrified of being caught in the collapse. A witch shouts at another witch. A werewolf snarls at a witch. A witch shoves a werewolf back into place. The covens aren't united anymore. They're breaking into pieces, small, frantic clusters trying to protect themselves from a hierarchy they no longer understand. Someone points at someone else. She was above her too. No, she wasn't. You're lying. You're trying to save yourself. The panic spreads like a crack through glass, fast and unstoppable. And through all of it, she stands untouched, not because they respect her, but because they're too afraid to get close. The covens keep fracturing, the structure keeps slipping, and the room waits for the vampires to return and decide what happens to the pieces. The covens are still snapping at each other when the air shifts, sharp, sudden, unmistakable. The vampires are back. They don't announce themselves. They don't speak. They just move, and the entire room collapses into silence so fast it feels like the sound was ripped out of it. A vampire steps into the fractured circle. Enough. The word hits like a command carved into stone. Every witch and werewolf freezes mid-breath. Hands drop. Arguments die. The panic stops as if someone cut the thread holding it together. Another vampire sweeps the gaze across the covens. You break formation once. A third steps forward. You do not break it twice. The covens scramble to pull themselves back into place, but the vampires don't wait for them to finish. The lead vampire lifts a hand. Stop. Everyone freezes again. Half-formed lines, uneven spacing, heads bowed at different angles. A broken circle caught in the act of trying to fix itself. The vampires take in the sight with cold, deliberate disappointment. This, one says, is instability. Another adds, and instability is corrected. The covens tremble. The lead vampire turns to the girl, calm, steady, untouched by the chaos around her. You stand, then to the covens. You do not. The hierarchy snaps back into place with a force that feels physical. The covens drop to their knees in a single, terrified wave, the fractured pieces slamming together under the weight of the vampire's command. The room is silent again. Not calm, not safe, just controlled, and she remains standing in the center of it, the only one allowed to. The covens are still kneeling when the lead vampire steps forward. Someone caused the break. The room freezes harder than before. Another vampire moves beside them. Name who? No one speaks. The silence stretches, not calm, not respectful, just fear thick enough to choke on. A vampire snaps their fingers. Stand. Only one person moves, a witch near the center of the covens. She rises slowly, shaking, eyes fixed on the floor. You step back first, a vampire says. She flinches. I do not lie. Her breath catches. Her hands tremble. She knows there's no escape. The lead vampire gestures toward the girl. Face her. The witch turns, barely able to lift her head. You fractured the line, the vampire says. You will answer for it. The covens hold their breath. The lead vampire looks at the girl. Deliver it. She doesn't hesitate. You're being lowered, she says. By their order. The witch's knees buckle. She drops in front of the girl, head bowed, shoulders shaking under the weight of the command. A vampire steps behind her. You caused instability. Another adds, and instability is corrected. The covens bow deeper, terrified of being next. The hierarchy tightens again, sharper, colder, more absolute, with her standing at the center of every shift the vampires force into place. The witch is still kneeling when the lead vampire steps forward, closing the space between them with a finality that stops the covens from even thinking about moving. This correction ends here. The words hit the room like a lock sliding into place. Another vampire circles behind the kneeling witch. You caused the break. A third steps to the girl's side. She held her position. You did not. The covens bow deeper, terrified of drawing attention now that the vampires have chosen to stop. The lead vampire lifts their hand. Stand. Only the girl moves. The kneeling witch stays where she is, head down, waiting for permission she knows won't come. A vampire speaks without looking at her. You remain lowered. Another adds, and you will not rise again without our command. The covens flinch. The vampires turn their attention back to the girl, not with praise, not with approval, but with the cold certainty of a decision already made. You held, the lead vampire says. You did not break. The hierarchy tightens around her, sharp and absolute. The vampires step back, signaling the end of the correction. The covens stay kneeling, afraid to lift their heads until the vampires leave. And she stands alone in the center of the room, the only one the hierarchy didn't crush. The vampires leave without another word. The door doesn't slam. There's no dramatic exit. They're simply gone, and the silence they leave behind is heavier than their presence. The covens stay kneeling, not because they're told to, Because none of them want to be the first to move without permission. The witch who was lowered last keeps her head down, hands pressed to the floor, waiting for a command that isn't coming. The two who were lowered before her stay frozen in place, afraid to lift their eyes. The rest of the covens hold their positions in a broken, uneven circle, the shape the vampires caught them in, the shape they weren't allowed to fix. And she stands alone in the center, not elevated, not celebrated, just standing, because she's the only one the hierarchy didn't force to the ground. The covens don't look at her, they don't speak, they don't shift, they wait, not for her, for the vampires to return. But the vampires don't return. The room stays locked in the aftermath, the kneeling, the silence, the fear, the new order, with her as the only point still upright. The hierarchy holds, the correction holds, and the covens stay exactly where the vampires left them. The silence stretches long enough that the covens start to realize the truth. The vampires aren't returning. The first movement is small, a witch lifting her head just enough to check the doorway. When nothing happens, she lowers it again, but the damage is done. The stillness breaks. Another witch shifts her weight. A werewolf exhales too loudly. Someone swallows hard, the sound sharp in the quiet. The covens begin to rise. Not together, not in formation, not with confidence. They rise in uneven, hesitant motions, one person at a time, each waiting to see if the vampires will punish them for it. When no punishment comes, the rest follow, slow and unsteady. The three who were lowered stay on the ground longer than the others, afraid to move without explicit permission. Eventually, even they push themselves upright, heads bowed, shoulders tight. No one speaks. They don't look at her directly, but they look around her, measuring the space she occupies now, the space the vampires carved open for her, the space none of them can challenge. The covens pull back into a loose circle, but it's not the same shape as before. It's wider, more cautious, more aware of her. The hierarchy holds, but the room feels different, thinner, stretched, waiting for the next command that isn't coming. She remains standing in the center, not because she's trying to, because no one else dares to stand where she stands. The covens keep the distance. The lowered ones keep their heads down, and the room settles into a new, uneasy order, the one the vampires left behind. The covens break first, not with noise, not with panic, just a quiet, desperate rush toward the exits, heads down, steps soft, each one trying to leave without drawing attention to themselves or to the space they're abandoning. The lowered ones move last, slipping out with the same silent urgency. In less than a minute, the room is almost empty. Only the highest-ranked witch and the highest-ranked werewolf remain, the ones who can speak, but only in the narrow space the vampires allow. They don't approach her, they don't circle her, they keep a respectful distance, the kind that acknowledges the shift without pretending they control it. The witch speaks first, voice low and steady. "You've held your place." The werewolf follows, tone just as controlled. And the structure moved around you. Neither of them looks her in the eye. Neither of them risks sounding like they're offering guidance or judgment. The witch continues. The covens will adjust. The werewolf adds, they have no choice. There's no warmth in their words. No resentment either, just the blunt acceptance of people who understand the hierarchy better than anyone else in the room. The witch inclines her head, not a bow, not submission, just acknowledgement. You stand where they placed you. The werewolf mirrors the gesture, and we will stand where we're told. They don't wait for her response. They don't linger, they turn and leave with the same quiet precision the vampires expect from them, the door closing behind them without a sound. And she is left alone in the room, the last one standing because the hierarchy says she is. The door clicks shut behind the last of the higher-ups, and the silence that follows is different from the one the vampires left behind. This one belongs to her. The room feels hollow without bodies in it, but the shape of the hierarchy still hangs in the air, the kneeling, the lowering, the fracture, the correction. None of it fades just because the covens walked out. She stays where she is, not because she's unsure, but because the position the vampires placed her in hasn't released her yet. Footsteps echo in the hallway, fast, quiet, retreating. The lower covens leaving the building entirely. A slower set follows, the higher-ups moving with controlled distance, giving her space they never would have given before. Then nothing. The building settles. She's alone in the aftermath the vampires created, standing in the exact center of the structure they reshaped around her. The weight of it doesn't crush her. It just holds, firm, cold, absolute. No one returns. No one checks on her. No one challenges the placement. The hierarchy stays exactly as the vampires left it. And she remains standing in the middle of a room that remembers every shift she survived. She barely has a moment alone before the door opens again. Not loudly, not cautiously, just enough to show the person on the other side wasn't waiting for permission. A figure steps in, one of the higher-ups who left earlier, but not the one who spoke to her. This one stayed in the hallway. This one waited for the others to leave. This one came back on purpose. They closed the door behind them. They don't bow. They don't challenge. They don't pretend they're supposed to be here. They stand just inside the room, hands at their sides, posture tight with something that isn't fear but isn't confidence either. You changed the room, they say. Not accusing, not admiring, just stating the fact the vampires carved into the hierarchy. They take a slow step closer, not enough to invade her space, but enough to show they're not here by accident. The covens won't say it, they continue. But they felt it. Another step, measured, controlled. You didn't break. A pause. They did. The words hang between them, not praise, not warning, just the truth the vampires forced everyone to see. They stop a few feet away, the closest anyone has stood to her since the correction. I waited for them to leave, they admit. I needed to see if you were still standing. They look at her then, not directly into her eyes, but close enough to acknowledge the shift. You are. They don't move closer. They don't step back. They just stand there, caught between hierarchy and instinct, waiting to see what she does with the space the vampires left her. They stand in front of her, steady but tense, as if choosing their next words with the same care they'd use handling a blade. I came back because the door opens, not loudly, not cautiously, just enough to cut their sentence clean in half. Another higher-up steps inside, someone who absolutely should not be here, someone who left with the others, someone who didn't wait in the hallway. They stop when they see the two of them standing together. Their eyes flick from her, to the one who returned, to the space between them. You weren't supposed to speak with her alone, the newcomer says. The first higher-up doesn't move, doesn't step back, doesn't apologize. I wasn't finished, they say. You shouldn't have started, the newcomer replies. The tension snaps tight, not aggressive, not rebellious, just the kind of pressure that forms when two people know the hierarchy is watching even when the vampires aren't in the room. The first higher-up turns back to her. I came back because the covens will shift faster than they admit. You need to know that. The newcomer cuts in immediately. And you need to know they're afraid of how fast you rose. The two higher-ups stand on opposite sides of the same truth, one offering warning, the other offering context, neither daring to step closer to her. The first higher-up lowers their voice. They'll adjust to you. The second counters, just as quietly. They'll test you. Both statements hang in the air, equal weight, equal risk. Neither of them waits for her response. They turn and leave together, not in agreement, not in conflict, just bound by the same hierarchy that forced them to speak and forced them to stop. The door closes, and she is left alone again, the last one standing, the center of the shift, the point the entire room now orbits.